Hi, and welcome to this Android video on 2D graphics. And 2D graphics isn't really all that difficult to comprehend in Android. Let's first look at the main activity. And this looks like any other main activity, a very simple one. What are we doing here? The only difference that we've got is that we're setting our content view to something else. We're setting our content view to a graphics view, and graphics view is something that we've defined. So by setting the content view, we can point to any view that we want to. And graphics view is a subclass of view. So let's look at graphics view. We can see here that the class graphics view extends view, and we've got some properties here that we've set up. We've got a screen width and screen height as integer. We've got a static int, side, and this is just going to control the side length of the square that we're about to draw. We've also got a canvas object and a bitmap object, and I've used underscores here to avoid conflicts later. But what we do with a view that we're going to draw graphics onto is we need a bitmap to actually draw the graphics into, and then we need a canvas to display the bitmap. So that's how this all works. We have a paint object, and I've just called that paint, and then we've got 4 points, and these are going to each contain 2 coordinates, and we're just going to draw a square. So line 1 of 2 coordinates, start and end, line 2, line 3, and line 4. This is our constructor. And in our constructor, we need to call up to views constructor. So what we're doing is we're just passing the context. Now remember, in main activity, we created a new graphics view with this, and this tells us that the context that we're passing into our constructor is actually the main activity. So we pass that up to views constructor, and then we initialize the paint object. So we make a new paint, we set its color to red, and we set its style to a stroke style. Now, the other methods that we must override when we're going to write graphics into a view, or any custom view like this, is we must override onMeasure and onDraw. OnMeasure needs to know the dimensions of the view. So it passes in 2 integers, a width and a height. A width specification here and a height specification. And then we call through to supers onMeasure, of course. And then we set up the screen width and the screen height using the measure spec width and height. So we get the size of the width and we get the size of the height, and now we have the screen's width and screen's height. We could do this with hard-coded pixels, but it wouldn't be compatible across multiple devices. So we get the screen width and screen height using getSize here. Now with that, we can set the dimension of the view, and we do that by calling setMeasureDimension on the view with the width and the height. Next thing, we create the bitmap and canvas. The bitmap is created with the screen width, the screen height, and a configuration. Now the configuration here, bitmap config ARGB_8888, means that we will have 8 bits each for the alpha, red, green, and blue channel. And what this will give us is our standard ARGB values of 0 to 255 because of the 8-bit width. And then we make a new canvas out of the bitmap that we just created. We set the background color by calling paint background on the view, and this is the easy way. Once the view knows how big it is, we can just paint the background to black color, and that'll work. And then we call make square and draw square. So onMeasure is responsible for getting for initially performing some setup on some objects, and also most importantly, for getting the width and the height of the view that we're going to be drawing into. There's nothing that says that this view has to be the whole screen. it could be placed as a subview within the layout. We could do that. But in this application, we're not using the layout XML for the main activity. We're using this custom view called Graphics View. So now let's look at, before we look at make square, paint background, draw square, let's look at onDraw. onDraw takes the canvas and just draws the bitmap onto the canvas. And it draws it using the bitmap and 0, 0, this is top left, and then paint. Okay. So here we go. Paint background is very simple. We take a color. We can see that paint background is color black. And then we get a new paint object and set its color to black, to the color we pass in, and set its style to fill. And then draw that rectangle right on the canvas with the screen width, the screen height, and our paint. So that's very simple. We can see how that works pretty easily. Make square takes the size of the screen and divides it by 2 to get the center X and Y point. And then it sets up our lines. So line 1 with its 2 array values, line 2, line 3, and line 4 is just taking the sides, that side value, which was set to 200, dividing it by 2, and then adding it and subtracting it from the center X and Y to give us a square shape. That's all we're doing here. So we're drawing 4 lines, and actually we're setting up the coordinates within 4 lines, and that's it. That makes the square, but it doesn't actually draw the square. It just does a little math to get the coordinates for the corners of the square. Draw square calls draw line on canvas, and there are a lot of different signatures for draw line. There are many different ones. The simplest, though, is to take our coordinates, line 1 X and Y, line 1 sub 0 X and Y, and then line 1 sub 1 X, Y with our paint color. So this draws a line from the first point of line 1 to the last point of line 1 with our paint color. And then we proceed to draw the rest of the lines. And then very importantly, we call invalidate on the view. And what this will do is force the view to redraw itself. And that draw code happens in onDraw. So every time the view is invalidated, onDraw is called, and we just draw the bitmap. And that is it. It's very simple. It is much simpler to see in code than it is to talk about in the discussion, certainly. So now when we run the code, let's just go ahead and run that. We'll see that shortly it will come up, set the context to this graphics view, and then draw the square, this red square, onto the view. Thank you very much.